financial life. But I also wonder, do we do that for our spiritual life as well? Is there a rebalancing that has to happen for our spiritual life? In the beginning of the year, the goal, I believe, for the church was to take root and grow fruit. And as you assess that, now that we're in December, what does that look like? Is there a rebalancing that needs to happen so that you can be prepared not only to close out the year, but to begin the next year of 2023? And with that in mind, I think our topic for today's message is actually quite appropriate as you try to rebalance and consider what are the things you need to do better at for next year. What are the things that you probably need to drop or to be more careful about? I think actually that's where Jesus was speaking to. And, you know, when I show you the passage that we're going to actually cover, you're going to know it, okay? But you're going to say, how did I get that, okay, out of this passage? And my hope is that you'll come away with a different insight of this story than you've had before. Because I sure did when I actually looked at the passage and researched it more. Well, the reason why I called this Destined to Have Integrity is, as I've been saying in these last few series of messages in Luke, is that Jesus is on his destination. He's trying to get to Jerusalem. And through there, we see a number of different themes and situations that come across that actually speak probably to something that we need to take more serious note of. And so my hope is that's what you'll see. And I'll get into that in just a second, but let me go ahead and see if I can get this to work. Do I have it on? Yeah, I think so. Is it it's the right mouse button? Oh, okay, there we go. Then he entered the temple area and began driving out those who were selling. Jesus, that is. It is written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it because all the people hung on his words. Notice I highlighted the phrase, people hung on his words, and also this whole idea of God's house being a house of prayer versus contrasting it being a den of robbers. Now everybody knows this passage, right? This is the passage, if you recall, about Jesus driving out the money changers. But probably the part that you didn't really know is, if you don't have notes, I actually left some hard copies in the back. There was a QR code, but that actually just shows you the slides with everything filled in. So you might want to be able to get the hard copy if you have it, and go ahead and fill it out if that helps you at all. But you know, many of us, as we grew up in Sunday school and everything else, we saw Jesus driving out the money changers. That's one story, right? It's actually two, okay? There's one he did it early on in his ministry. This one in Luke actually shows up later, towards the end. And so there's one in John chapter 2. There's one that we find here in Luke chapter 19. So there were actually two instances of when Jesus threw out the money changers at the temple. Now most of us are saying, what would it have been like if we were there, right? And if we were one of the disciples? Most likely we would say, oh, here he goes again. He's going to throw out the money changers, okay, when he saw what they're doing. And I think the question, the moral of this story that we often get as kids is, this was Jesus angry. You know, he was angry because they were taking advantage, okay? But I don't think we dug deep enough to see how that still could be possible in our society today, in our church society today. So what was Jesus mad about? I think he was mad about this. And this is digging into the facts. I mean, basically, there were temple leaders, guys in charge of the temple, right? Everyone was coming to give their offering, okay, to have their worship. And basically what was happening was that the temple leaders were taking advantage of the people when it came to worship elements, okay? So the parallel for us today, if you didn't think about it, is actually this. As I looked up online, we're going to have communion later on, right? This is how we take it. It looks just like that, almost dead on, right? So I looked at how much these things cost, okay? And apparently they cost 5 cents. Okay, so if you feel inclined to, you may want to add 5 cents to your offering. Okay, every time we have communion. Okay, that helps defray the costs, right? So basically, it cost them 5 cents to have these worship elements. What they were doing, and this is what I had to dig in and find the research for, is what was the markup on this? Okay, we know that I know that word markup lately is because I've been trying to look for another car, and it's amazing. What you'll see is they'll show you, in the old days, they show you a sticker price. And it's like, oh yeah, I can get lower than that, right? Nowadays, it's like they show you the sticker price, and you have to start thinking about how much more is this car going to cost, okay? And so there's what they call dealer markup that actually happens. That's what the dealer layers on top. So what was the dealer markup here on these communion elements? Apparently, it was $500, okay? So what would normally cost 5 cents, they were charging $500. That would be the same thing as today if we said, in order for you to take communion today, okay, and because you didn't bring your own, okay, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to charge you $500, okay? But what they were basically making was quite a bit of profit, as you can imagine. I didn't even bother to calculate out. So if someone has a calculator, you can tell me later on as to what the markup really was. But it's amazing, the markup that they were doing. And it wasn't just, a lot of us think this like we picture in our mind this like the flea market. Oh, they were just selling stuff, right? Everybody was kind of independent vendor on their own. It wasn't, right? Basically, these money changer guys, they were organized by the temple leaders. They were the ones that were saying, hey, we're going to pay you to go out, set up your stand, okay, and then it's just like, in a ways, it's kind of like at the flea market, the people that are in charge of the whole thing said, a cut of your profit, that's got to go to the temple, okay, is how they did it. So that's where, these people were marking up this enormous amounts. It'd be the same thing, like I said, we came in church, we said, okay, before you come in, before you take communion, often you hear me say, oh, you have to be saved, you have to be baptized, a member of the church to join in communion. I show you 2 slides, which I'll show you later on. And if I added on there, oh, and by the way, your account will be charged $500 if you want to take communion. Okay, it would be the same kind of thing that would go on as to what they're doing. They're like, what? Why do I have to pay this money? It's like, sorry, you want to take communion? This is the only way to do it. It's like I would have brought my own. Nope, too late for that. And that's actually what was happening. So they were purposely drawing people in, and they basically, I think the word is upselling. Okay, for those of you who knows sales, I think it's upselling. Okay, where you say, you come in to buy this, but you try to sell you something else as well. I used to be a shoe salesman when I was trying to get through college. Okay, and I remember one of the things they used to tell us is that when you sell a pair of shoes, right, especially for the ladies, okay, not so much for the men, probably men now, okay, but at the time it was like when they buy a pair of shoes, the first thing you ask is, do you have a handbag with that? And undoubtedly, most of the time, these ladies who buy these shoes don't have a handbag with it. Okay, so then we bring them over to the handbags and we should go and show them that. And then I forgot there were some other accessories that we'd also, do you need shoe polish? Do you need all this kind of stuff? So we were upselling them, as to, they came in to buy a pair of shoes. They ended up buying all this kind of stuff. Well, that's essentially what was happening here, is that they were upselling these people on communion elements. Okay, who was making the profit? If you think about it, it's not, and this is the part that we often don't get across, right? We often think, oh, these are just some people just trying to make money. Temple was making the money, okay? Somehow the temple leaders organized this grand scheme so they can make a profit. And for many of us, we think, well, what's wrong with that? Right? What's wrong? The church gets the money. Okay, isn't that what it's all about? Or is it? And I wonder if we have to take a good hard look at what we do in church today. For years, I was an administrative pastor. So I was the guy that was both the pastor that would speak on occasion on Sundays, but I was also the guy that was the Judas that handled the money bag to make sure we're not spending too much, right? It was that kind of role. Hated amongst most people. okay, because you're trying to be good and in a sense bad in a ways. And so, you know, I manage the business of church. And as I think about that, I think about the phrase that Jesus said. He said in here, a house of prayer, okay? And when we think about a house of prayer, right? Prayer focuses on God versus a den of greed, okay? And greed focuses on ourselves. Doesn't even focus on helping other people. It focuses on self. As I was in this role before, there were a couple of things I learned. Okay, and many of the conflicts, and so, you know, people would ask me, oh yeah, we had this happen at church. We had this happen in church. And I know this is being recorded, so if my friends and family and church folks that were out there that were with me at that time, I just want to let you know, the major portion of the conflict we often had at church was conflict of interest. We never realized that it's people that were using the church for their own personal gain. And it happened in subtle ways. Oh, I'll bring in Sister so-and-so. Okay, she can sell the such and such at the church. Oh, you know, it's okay, right? She tithes. It's all right. You know, oh, and so at the school. We want to hire so-and-so's brother, you know, because it's helping the kingdom, right? Often the things that we had that would go on that seemed like big conflict because people didn't get along, at the underlying root of it all was conflict of interest. Someday, and so I'm telling you now because I'll never be able to tell it face to face with people, you know, but someday in heaven I get to tell it all, okay? And that is, you know, a lot of it is because people were looking out for their own personal gain. They were, and church no longer became a place of worship. It became a place to do business. When I graduated from college, I didn't have a job, okay? Well, actually I had a part-time job, but it wasn't making enough. So I remember my brother told me about this cool thing. You know, you can do work on the side at your own convenience. And what happens is you sell this stuff, like vitamins or whatever. Yeah, it was vitamins. And they had water purifier. I won't name the name, okay, just in case any of you sell the products, okay? And I remember going to the office of this guy, you know, and he says, so, you know, how you know, he asked me, well, why you want to do this? I said, like, you know, I want to make more money, okay, because I don't make enough money in my job, okay? And he goes, well, and strangely enough, the first thing he asked, do you go to church? I was like, what kind of question is that? You know, do you go to church? You know, it's the first thing, and some of you are thinking, oh yeah, it's a Christian organization. That's why they asked you to go to church. No, that was not it. He goes, do you go to church? You know, and I said, yeah. Because how many people are at your church? I said, well, you know, our church is roughly about 1,000. You know, at the time, it was about 1,000. And he says, that's your marketing opportunity, is what he would say. And I was like, what? You know, what does that mean? And I've learned over the years, first as a young man, now as a retired man, and I'll go on to say older man, is that, you know, there aren't, as much as we call church a place of prayer and worship and fellowship, there are people that look at church as a business. And there is church that looks at church as a business as well. And I think about that, and I think that's why Jesus was mad. He was mad because what was supposed to be God's organization, God's ministry, was being used for personal gain. And even and manipulating people in a ways, even if it's not personal gain, it's organizational gain. And that wasn't good either. That's what I think Jesus was trying to get at when he gets at this whole idea of saying, I'm not going to make my church that. I'm not going to allow my church to be that way. You know, I think about it for myself because the dynamics I started to learn going through ministry as a young minister to being an older one is, as I reflect back, and if I can share these kinds of experiences with you, you know, I always wondered, what do people go to church for? And I remember I had somebody tell me this. And so the folks who have grown up in Hong Kong and came over here, you're going to have to validate this for me. But this is what somebody who came from, because we always wonder, how come the Chinese-speaking giving never seemed to take much root, okay? There were some that would give all out, but there were some that were just a little cautious about that. And also, what's more is when it came time to have stewardship campaigns and all this kind of stuff, they would check out and go to another church and say, tell us when the campaign's over so that we can come back. Okay? Is what would happen. I was wondering, what's the dynamic? And then I used to even get from my own mom. My own mom says, the church needs to be given more to people, especially us old people. And I was like, what? And this was when, I'm the one that's holding the purse strings, and I'm saying, the church doesn't have all this money to just give people. And I always wondered what was the case. And until I asked one of my friends who was from Hong Kong. And this is what he told me. And he was also involved, he was a co-worker, a co-laborer with me, and where he looked after the finances as well. And he goes, David, this is how it works. He said, in Hong Kong, what ends up happening is the church is the provider of goods and services. You take from the church. Okay, that's what the church is for. The church is there, and so these people that grow up from Hong Kong, they come here to America. They see the church. They're like, oh, this is the place that provides you goods and services. This is where you go get your lunch. This is where you take care of your kids. This is where so they expect that there's that kind of expectation that goes on. So it's hard to break. And this is what I've learned in my dynamics in working with a Chinese American church. Is that, it's hard to break that cycle to be able to say the church is not just a place for goods and services. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to get at here. It's like, as much as we want to be able to offer those things so that people would be able to come to know Christ as their personal Savior, that shouldn't be the main driver of what we do as a church. And I wonder if that's why we see what we see when it comes to the pandemic. Is that when we had the pandemic, all of a sudden most churches lost a lot of their attendance. It's because they weren't offering the goods and services anymore. They weren't offering babysitting. They weren't offering any of these things. And so when you've grown up as a church raising a congregation of takers, then you basically have nothing left when you as a church have nothing to give anymore. And I wonder if Jesus was just kind of like speaking to that whole topic of saying, let's make our church a church of prayer, a church that focuses on God, that worships Him. And so, as I share that with you, I think it also drills down to us as individuals as well. What's our purpose? Why do we even go to church? What is it really so that we can give? So we can serve others, so that we can serve God, that we can worship collectively? Or is it because, there's a lunch afterwards, and so that's the reason why I go? And it sounds ridiculous, but in a lot of cases, it's actually true. What you see as the motivation that has people come to church. And I'm not saying that you get rid of lunch or you get rid of all these things. What I'm saying is maybe at this time of year, we need to have a rebalancing of what our church's integrity is all about, but also what our individual integrity is all about. What is integrity? And I think that's why Jesus was so upset, because he was saying these church leaders who did this, they lost their integrity. Okay, they basically lost their integrity in doing what they did in trying to jack up the price of these worship elements. And I think integrity is this. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. And I've also heard another definition, which actually fits me even better, I think is integrity is being whole. It's being whole. And so in addition to being holy, H-O-L-Y, I think we need to be holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y, right? And that God wants all of us. He wants our principles to be able to play out in our actions. I like it. I like what Henry Cloud, he's this famous Christian psychologist, wrote. And I put it in your handout so that you'll be able to keep it and read it over and over again. He says, integrity involves a complete picture of a whole person. and his or her performance. To have integrity is to have all of the different aspects of your being working together. A person with integrity integrates character into all other facets of his or her personality. Integrity fits everywhere in your life. And if we were to boil it down to what it probably means to be whole in our life, I think it's this, is that every word and action that we have they're guided by principles. They're guided by principles. As we look at, the fruit of the Spirit, as we look at the 10 Commandments, as we look at many of these things, when we talk about, I've showed you a graphic where, we said, a fully functioning follower of Christ is someone that, is able to abide by the 10 Commandments, that practices the fruit of the Spirit, that practices in Isaiah about what, being able to offer justice to those that are oppressed. And so, as we look at those kinds of things, if those are our principles, how much are we playing that out? If we're talking about generosity as a principle that we have, why are we taking more than giving? I have a graphic here that I wanted to be able to share with you. Okay, and it's a couple of different pictures, and I'm going to go ahead and just put them all up here, okay, for you. And I think of when I think off the top of my head of people of integrity, I think of these kinds of people. I think of Fred Roberts, who's the person on the very left. Many of you know him. Probably your kids may have watched him, or you, growing up in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Okay, if you didn't know, Fred Rogers was actually a Presbyterian minister, ordained Presbyterian minister. Okay, and he actually, for the now newer children out there, Daniel Tiger, he was the creator of Daniel Tiger. Okay, and so his organization and efforts have continued to go on. And one of the things that I appreciated, I saw this. I actually heard an interview of Fred Rogers saying this. Okay, and he was saying, he was always very caring of children, but he was caring of individuals as well. So nobody could really say anything bad about him. And one of the things that he did was which I try to take to heart for myself, is he'll say, when I'm the person that is most important to me is the person that I'm speaking to right now. He had that kind of attitude where he treated people with deep respect and admiration. I've been reading this book called, Why We're Not Listening. Okay, and one of the things that says is often we listen just so that we can get permission to talk. So we really don't care what a person says. We're just waiting for our chance to talk. They said Twitter, in the same book, says Twitter is actually 90% of the people don't contribute. Okay, 10% of the ones that feel they have something to say. So it's unfortunately 10% of the people that are driving 90%, are driving the whole of what is being voiced on Twitter. Everyone else is just kind of off in the background. Often the people that talk probably have the least amount of value to say. But Fred Rogers wasn't that kind of person. He was the kind of person that said, I want to be able to listen and learn from everyone. And how can I help you? I started reading another book that also talked about, have we often, and this is more of a Christian thing, although it was written for sales and entrepreneurship, the title of the book is What's in It for Them? Often we hear the term, what's in it for me, right? And it was because this guy who wrote it, he grew when he was a little kid, his mom died of ovarian cancer. And so he always, his dad was just so distraught. That's all he could remember, was his dad was so distraught as a little kid, 4 years old. He died. And he figured, the only way I can give joy to my dad and to the rest of the world is if I know they're hurt and I can find some way to help them. And so throughout his life, he had learned, to look for, what is this person struggling with? And that's what I could fill in. That's more a Christian value than it is a sales value. I hope you can see by that. And, you know, can we also say for ourselves, you know, when we talk to somebody else, when we listen to them, how can I help with their struggle? I think that changes the direction of what can I take versus what can I give. You know, we often think of Abraham Lincoln, you know, as a person. The more I think about how remarkable, I read the book Team of Rivals, and for those of you who didn't read it, basically what happens is Abraham Lincoln, all the people that apparently he was competing with to, you know, run for president, he basically took those people and made them part of his cabinet. So I don't know if you realize, so he took his opponents and made them a part of his cabinet, and they had so much respect for him. So instead of fighting him, you know, they were able to see this guy's real. He's genuine. But long before he became president of the United States, he ran for state senate. And he was running against a guy named Madison. Okay? And Madison had 40% of the vote. Okay? Based on polls. Lincoln had, about, I think it was 38 or 37%. And there was another guy. His name was Trumbull. Okay? Who only had like 9% of the vote. Okay? But Lincoln, wanting to obviously win and beat Madison, should have reached out to the Trumbull voters who only had 9%, and that would have tipped the scale so he could have won. Lincoln didn't do that. He was what they call a giver. Okay? And so Lincoln saw that Trumbull, you know, his point in all this was he just wanted he didn't want Madison to win. Okay, because he said Madison was a bad guy. It turned out Madison was a bad guy. Because when he finally got into office and something else, and a lot of us can't relate to this anymore, but apparently he cashed checks that were already cashed. So I don't know if you can't do that now in today's society, but it's like, yeah, that's really bad. I mean, so, you know, basically you took your paycheck and you cashed it twice. Okay, is essentially what Madison would do. You know, so he was just a bad guy. Okay, and what Lincoln did, because he says this guy, he can't be in office. You know, I just don't want him to get in office. Rather than Lincoln trying to reach out to Trumbull's voters and to be able to, you know, just inch above, Lincoln dropped out of the race. He dropped out of the race and said, "I want you all to vote for Trumbull." Okay. Is what he did. And from that experience, Trumbull won. Okay? And I thought it was interesting because one of the things that was highlighted in the book that I was reading called Give and Take was that Lincoln was just such a giver. They said that, yeah, and people saw that as politically challenging. That it worked against him because he was just such a giver. He cared more about people than he cared about himself. You know, and he cared more about his ideals and his principles more than he cared about himself being able to get the gain. I thought that was admirable. I still, you know, am amazed how Lincoln was able to reconcile, because probably up to that point in the Bible, everyone was saying, well, slaves are okay. It's in the Bible. It's all right. It's okay. You know, and how Lincoln had to basically turn the tide to say, no, this was an oppression against people. Is what he is. It's just masterful when I think about that. But then I thought I'd add these two other people that you probably know, because, you know, these people of integrity that you're talking about with Mr. Rogers and Abraham Lincoln, it's not real clear as to, you know, as to whether they were what we call evangelicals or Christians in any way. So often we think of Mother Teresa, and we also think of Billy Graham, okay, as people of integrity that are whole. And you know, when I first gave this message on integrity, those were the people I thought of as well as people of integrity. I remember sharing this in a message, and what ended up happening was right afterwards, my son was with us at the time, and he goes, "Dad, you know, I just want you to know, do you know there's actually some controversy about Mother Teresa as being a person of integrity?" I was like, "What?" You know, I never heard anything of that. Then I started looking it up. And I started realizing that, well, maybe she wasn't as wholehearted as we thought. You see, what happens is Mother Teresa apparently had these hospitals, okay, and they were really like poor. They offered really poor care. And what ended up happening, they said Mother Teresa's real purpose wasn't really so much to help people, is to grow the Catholic Church. Okay, and so I just looked up, and you can look it up yourself. Okay, and then what's more is Mother Teresa had often said, well, the poor conditions that they had in these hospitals, well, that's people that's the gift of being poor. And a lot of, they said 40%, they have a higher mortality rate in Mother Teresa hospitals than in any other, because she would basically say, well, you just died, that's the gift of being poor, so that's the grace that you have of dying poor. Okay, but when Mother Teresa had a heart condition, she immediately went to American hospitals. Okay, to be able to get her care, and so you can look them on Google. Okay, and it says there that all you got to do is look up Mother Teresa net worth. Mother Teresa was worth $125 million. Okay, and so I start to wonder, was church a business for her in that case? No, I'm not saying that Mother Teresa was bad. Okay, she did some wonderful things. But I think it really is a lesson to all of us, is there something that we need to rebalance? Was there something that Mother Teresa could have rebalanced as she was going through her journey as well of trying to offer service to other people? Then I learned about Billy Graham as well, because my brother and I, we used to always have walked and we talked about what a how neutral a guy Billy Graham was. He gave almost basically the same, if you ever watched his things on TV, he gave him the same set of messages, okay? And it was always about, coming to Christ, right? Is usually what it was all about. That's like, no one could say anything bad about Billy Graham, is what I had thought. And then I started reading this other book, okay? And maybe it could be wrong, okay, but many of you grew up in this era. Okay, remember when Richard Nixon was vying for president against Hubert Humphrey? Okay, during that time, what happens is Billy Graham, Richard Nixon, if you didn't know his faith, he was a Quaker. Okay, so it wasn't necessarily Christian faith completely. Okay, so at the time, Billy Graham actually had meetings with him so that he could talk to him, and these are all historical facts that are apparently out there, is put together by a person that actually is a Christian professor. Okay, and in there it said that Billy Graham taught Richard Nixon how to say all the right things that are Christian, so that they could get the votes. Okay, and the remarkable thing about all this is that Hubert Humphrey was a theology student in seminary at the time. Yet when Hubert Humphrey went to a Christian college to speak, they booed him. Okay, and so it's interesting to see how politics have kind of played into into our Christianity as well. My point again isn't necessarily to say that Billy Graham or Mother Teresa are bad people. They did amazing. Oh, and then by the way, if you look up net worth of Billy Graham, when he died, it's $25 million. Okay, now I don't know if any of us have, I suspect none of us have 125 million or even 25 million as a net worth. But I look at that and I have to say to myself, I don't want to necessarily judge these people, but was there a certain rebalancing that probably needed to go on in their lives? Yes, it was about faith, but was it about something else? Was there a bigger business that happens in our time today, just like Jesus' day with the money changers? And I think there is. So my point in here is this. It's not so much to castigate these people or to praise these people, but this should show the difference between people that are givers versus people that are takers. Allow me to be able to share with you some very concrete ones that you probably heard of in the news. This is Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes started a company called Theranos. Okay, she was a dropout from Stanford. Okay, so this company was in the Bay Area, and basically what Elizabeth Holmes did was she started this company, had this contraption that apparently was supposed to test blood. Okay, and say whether so with a single thumb or stick of your finger, apparently you can get all these tests. Okay, and most labs can't even do it. Well, what ended up happening, just to make a long story short, is that in putting out this device that she had, she was able to get Walgreens to buy it, I think it was, and then she went through the trials for it, and essentially it wasn't her machine. They had actually taken a Siemens machine and put their label on it. Okay, so it didn't work for one thing, but it wasn't even their machine, what they ultimately did. And so what ended up happening is they said, well, you're going to put these clinical trials out there. That means old people are going to get tested, and they're going to determine whether they have cancer or not. And your result will determine how they live their life. So they could think, oh, if they take this test and they find out, oh, I don't have cancer, I'm okay, and then they can get sick. That's a problem, okay? And Elizabeth Holmes said this, well, that's their problem. They signed up for the clinical trial. So whatever happens, so she absolved herself of any responsibility. Basically says, as long as you can make my product look good, I don't care what happens to you, okay? This guy's name is Kenneth Lay. Okay? For those of you who you don't know him, you remember a company called Enron. Okay, it's sunk many of our 401ks. Okay, is basically what ended up happening. And Kenneth Lay was involved in a scandal where, accounting-wise, they said they had more money than they had, kind of thing. And then, but when the company was going under, this is the bad part, and the company was going under, what ended up happening is Kenneth Lay said, psh, told his family members, okay, sell your stock, okay? Whereas he told the investors themselves, oh no, our company's doing fine, everything's great, right? And so they trusted Kenneth Lay. But in underlying it all, he was selling his shares to get out as quick as he can. They said the indicative thing you would have learned about Kenneth Lay, that he was more a taker than a giver, is this, is that if you look at the corporate report, annual report for Enron, big giant picture of Kenneth Lay. He thought only of himself. Okay, was what we learned from that. And then many of you have heard about this guy, Bernie Madoff. Okay, and if you haven't, I'll tell you about him now. Okay, basically he had this fund that essentially the simplest way to describe it is, you give me $10,000, okay, and I'll give you the whatever $1,000 interest. Okay. But I'm actually not investing the $10,000. I took the $9,000 and either spent it on myself or did something else. And the only way I can pay you the $1,000 is I go get someone else who can give me $10,000. Okay, that's essentially what he did. They call and basically it's sunk. So they call it a Ponzi. Okay, a scam is what it is. And so he went to jail, ended up dying in jail for it as well. Same thing at the end. You knew, obviously, if you're not investing the $10,000 in anything, you're doing something wrong. But they said in all these cases, Elizabeth Holmes, Kenneth Lay, Bernie Madoff, these people behind it all were what they call takers. People that saw it's what's in it for me. Not what's in it for other people. And I liked what, in this one book, which actually highlights these people, Adam Grant's book on Give and Take, it says takers are self-centered and focused only on what benefits they can get from others. Now, I don't think people are necessarily classified in givers and takers, and stay that way the rest of their life. But I think what often happens is you're a little bit of a giver, certain percentage, and you're a little bit of a taker as well. And I think as we get here into the end of the year, we just have to figure out, how do we rebalance our efforts so that we can give more rather than take like we have. It's interesting, and then you say, well, how's that all fit in? Well, if you see at the end of that passage, remember it said that the people hung on Jesus' words. What Jesus said about being a house of worship, a house of prayer versus a den of robbers. They couldn't forget it. They couldn't. You ever step on gum? I know you don't. There's probably, our streets are pretty clean now. But I remember as a little kid, even growing up, I'd always step on gum. It was like the worst thing when you step on, because you can't get it off your shoe. It just sticks to you. To me, it was like the worst feeling is when you step on gum. Okay? And you need to think of this passage in that way, is that it stuck to them. When Jesus did what he did and said what he said, they couldn't get it loose. This whole idea of integrity was stuck to them. It's like what the temple leaders did. That translates down to us as individuals. It's like, are we taking more than we're actually giving? This idea of our actions not playing out through our principles, right? That all stuck to them. And so when I look at it, and I think, what does it mean when it's our integrity that sticks to us? It's that it's difficult to unstick. My hope is that is the case for you, that as you rebalance your efforts in December and try to think of ways that you can give and live the principles that you have based on God's Word, is that they'll be difficult to unstick, that they'll be ones that bind onto you. And so let me close with just a couple of thoughts on integrity and questions that we can ask ourselves as we come to the close of the year. Is what I'm doing causing someone to lose so I can win? That's what the temple leaders were doing. They were taking advantage of these people, manipulating them in such a way that they lost, but it's so that they could win. I think about that if all the what we call, go back and look at your Instagram and Facebook if you have that, right? All the things we're thankful for, that we're blessed for. Do we ever think about how we got there, or what somebody else had to give up so that we can enjoy that? And that's really what the theme of this question is all about. Is as we enjoy our privileges, is there someone that sacrificed or that has less because we have more? And then, am I manipulating someone to do something that I wouldn't do? And I want to be cautious on using this example, but if it's true with Mother Teresa and the fact that people can die poor and in grace, yet I need to go to an American hospital. That's like two different messages. You're manipulating people to do something you wouldn't have done yourself. And then the last thing that we see is, would I treat my loved one in that same way? When we're harsh with people, when we negotiate, when we do all these things for business purposes, that we often in Christian circles claim stewardship as, are we actually being not so nice and not so Christian either? Allow me to be able to give an example of that, when looking at the world of sports. What you see now in the world of sports, this is coming out more and more as to how we affect athletes. Many of you have seen this lady. Her name's Naomi Osaka. She is a tennis player that is of Japanese, and I think it's Jamaican descent. Okay, and she speaks perfect English. I don't know if she actually grew up in America. Okay, but anyways, what happens is she became so distraught because of social media and everything else. Her mental health just was damaged. She tried to come back, but as far as media and everything else, she's never been the same player since. And what we see is you can't attribute it to anything else. Her skills degrading or any of that stuff. You can only attribute it to mental health. Many of us know the situation with Simone Biles, and where she claimed it was her mental health. And what weighs on them is what I discovered is actually their consumption of social media. What are people saying about me? And it actually weighs mentally on them. I thought it was interesting. I think it was Josh Jacobs. He's the running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. He ran the most phenomenal, he had the most phenomenal game last Sunday, where he went over 300 yards in passing and rushing. May not mean much to you in terms of football, but the performance is the 7th best, okay, in I think NFL history, what he did. And they asked him, what did you do differently? And I thought it was interesting, his response. He goes, I blocked out social media last week. Okay, it's what ended up happening that allowed this amazing performance to occur. I want to share with you another one. Many of you, for the NBA fans, this guy is Russell Westbrook. I like the idea that he went back to Los Angeles because he's from Los Angeles. I think he played for UCLA. If you go down there, there's car dealerships that say Russell Westbrook, Chrysler, Jeep, that kind of stuff. So he's giving back. He's kind of, giving back to the community as well. Well, he wasn't doing so well, okay, and for the Lakers. Finally doing better now, okay, but he wasn't doing so well, and he was shooting shots outside that weren't going in. Okay, and in fact, they weren't even hitting the rim, and so people were chanting West Brick. Okay, brick is a term meaning you throw up a shot that doesn't hit anything. Okay, that's a terrible shot. Okay, and so they were chanting West Brick, West Brick. He said something that I thought was interesting because most of us think athletes are above it all. They don't care what we say, what we boo, or any of that kind of stuff. And he said, I didn't appreciate that. You could boo me. You could say stuff about me. You could say I'm a terrible player. But when you say, or when you chant my family name out there, when you make fun of my family name, you're not making fun of me. You're making fun of my family, is what he had said. And it got me to think, and how does this fit into our integrity? If we live by our principles, are our actions consistent in that way? When we yay or boo, and we laugh, when we do all these different kinds of things in our life, how it might hurt somebody else. And really that's what I got out of this, is as I think about the things that we do, and I think about our athletes that are out there, many of them are damaged because people like us like stuff. We'll do the likes on the social media or we'll also read the news clips of how they were doing poorly, and that way my point is this: have we ever thought much about how our actions damage somebody else? And I think if we do more of that, we're getting that point where we're becoming more whole in our life, where we're becoming a person of integrity. So my hope is that you take these questions away, reflect on them for 2022, reflect on them when we have communion in just a little bit as we close. And may this be a way that we can, in a sense, rebalance our own life, to live life that takes root and grows fruit. Let's close in a word of prayer. Our God, we thank you for this time that we can study your word. My hope is that each person here takes away a different perspective than what they had of this cursory story of Jesus just driving away the money changers. It's real. It's happening in our lifetime, and it's happening with us as individuals. And so I pray, Lord, that each of us would be able to, myself definitely included, is that as we think about the things we do, are we manipulating somebody else? Are we doing things that might actually be so blessed for us, but so cursed for somebody else? Are we doing things and treating people in a way that we wouldn't even treat our loved ones that way? So I pray, Lord, that this would give us a simple time to reflect on what we need to do to rebalance in our own lives. We ask in Jesus' name, amen. Turn it back over to